So I've been seeing these clips of Dr. Lamont Hill and Myron from Fresh and Fit debating on the Pierce Morgan program. And they were talking about this whole issue where you had a racist white woman call a 5-year-old autistic boy the N word. And on this particular panel, you had this white woman defending that other racist white woman's right to use the N word. And so this guy Myron spent his time tap dancing. He spent his time shoe shining and ass kissing white people, pandering for white validation, pandering for white attention, pandering for a pat on the head from Mr. Charlie by, deflecting away from an obvious example of racism, being that white woman calling a 5-year-old boy the N word, and focusing all his anger towards black people. This man was whining and crying about, the Black Lives Matter protests that took place around the country, lying and saying that they were quote unquote destroying the country when most of those protests were nonviolent, when most of the protests were people peacefully assembling to protest against police brutality, to protest against a system that allows police to brutalize and unalive black people on a regular basis. But instead of being outraged about that reality, this man is outraged because people were protesting against it. And he went on to exaggerate the situation to make it seem like activists were tearing down the country when they were not. When they were not. And then this guy went on to point his crusty finger at Dr. Umar Johnson and Tariq Nasheed and talk about how they are the racists. He talked about how there's hypocrisy in terms of black people being allowed to be tribal and, black people like Dr. Umar Johnson complaining about black people being with white women and all that kind of stuff. He wants to make that the issue. He wants to make them the racists. When those two men, even though they are influencers, they do not have real and actual power. Racism has to be tied to power. You can call someone any kind of name, but if you don't have power, it doesn't matter. White people have power in this society. They have the power to dictate the quality of education that black people receive. They have the power to allocate resources and stuff like that. When we look at, the massive wealth disparities between black and white people, where one study said it would take black people over 200 years to amass the same level of wealth as white people. Black people, black families have a fraction of the wealth that white families have. Black people there are all kinds of health disparities between black people and white people. There are all kinds of educational disparities between black people and white people. There are all kinds of sentencing disparities between black people and white people. There are all kinds of disparities when it comes to police interactions, when it comes to police brutality and harassment. There are massive disparities between black and white people. But yet and still, this one man wants to focus all of his attentions on a couple of guys with some opinions. And black people, speaking up for black people, is not racism. That's not racism at all. It is black liberation. And when black people cry out for justice, they want to make us the perpetrators. They want to make themselves the victims. And it's just a shame that you have this man who claims that he's African American because he's from the Sudan, going out of his way to parrot the talking points of white supremacy. This man is nothing but a white supremacist and blackface. This man, despite calling himself a quote unquote African American, is not like us. And it's a sad reality, but too many of these immigrants, quote unquote black immigrants, too many of them don't identify with our struggle. Too many of them don't understand the plight of the African American. And too many of them are so eager to please white people that they have no problem trashing their fellow black people. And this is not to say, that this is the case with most of them, or the majority of them, but for too many of them, this is the case. And this guy, Myron, is a prime example of a white supremacist in blackface.